Sarah Chen stood in the massive crystal hall of the Galactic Council, feeling very small among the towering alien representatives. The human ambassador had expected today to be about trade deals and paperwork. Instead, she found herself at the center of what might be the biggest diplomatic incident in human history. "This must be some kind of joke," rumbled Ambassador Zextal, his crystalline form glowing with blue irritation. The monarch of the crystalline empire chose a human to guard the royal twins. The council chamber erupted in laughter. Some of the alien delegates didn't even try to hide their mockery. Their crystalline bodies sparkled with amusement, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the walls. Sarah took a deep breath and stood straighter. At 5 feet 6 inches, she was the shortest person in the room, but she refused to be intimidated. "The late monarch's will is clear," she said firmly. "I have been chosen as the guardian of Princess Xandra and Princess Yandra." High Counselor Virax floated forward, her transparent body pulsing with red light. "You don't even understand what unlike twins are. How could you possibly raise them?" "Then explain it to me," Sarah challenged, keeping her voice calm and professional despite her racing heart. The High Counselor's light dimmed slightly. "Unlike twins are the rarest and most precious occurrence in our species. 2 royal children, born sharing a quantum state. Their very existence powers our civilization's most advanced technology." Sarah nodded slowly. As a quantum physicist, before becoming an ambassador, she understood more than they thought. "And where are the princesses now?" "They wait in the royal chambers," Virax said dismissively. "But surely you see how ridiculous this is. A human can't possibly." A soft chime interrupted her. The massive crystal doors at the far end of the chamber slid open, revealing 2 young crystalline figures. The princesses were smaller than the adult aliens, their bodies transparent like diamond, but with swirling patterns of light that seemed to mirror each other perfectly. The chamber fell silent. Sarah felt a pull toward the young royals that she couldn't explain. As she watched, their internal lights pulsed in perfect synchronization. "Ambassador Chen," they spoke in unison, their voices musical and strange. "Our father spoke often of you. He said humans see things differently than others. He said this would be important." Sarah walked toward them, ignoring the disapproving murmurs from the council members. She knelt before the princesses, bringing herself to their eye level. "I'm honored by your father's trust," she said softly. "I know I'm not what anyone expected, but I promise to do my best to protect and guide you." "We know," said Xandra, her lights shifting to a warm golden color. "That's why he chose you," finished Yandra, her patterns matching her sister's exactly. A harsh laugh broke the moment. "This is absurd," shouted one of the council members. "A human can't even tell them apart. How will she protect them from those who would harm them?" Sarah turned, her eyes sharp. "I can tell them apart just fine." Xandra's light patterns swirl clockwise. Yandra's swirl counterclockwise. "And what do you mean, those who would harm them?" The council chamber suddenly grew very quiet. Sarah looked at the nervous faces around her and then back at the young princesses. She had a feeling the late monarch's choice hadn't been random at all. Something was wrong in the crystalline empire, and maybe it would take human eyes to see it clearly. "Come, princesses," she said, offering her hands to them. "Let's get you home." As they left the chamber, Sarah could still hear the council members whispering and laughing. Let them laugh, she thought. They'd learned soon enough that underestimating humans was always a mistake. 3 days after the council meeting, Sarah Chen sat in her new office in the Crystal Palace, surrounded by holographic displays showing quantum equations. The princesses sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, their crystalline bodies glowing softly as they played a game with light patterns. "Miss Chen," Hexandra said suddenly, "why aren't you afraid of us?" Sarah looked up from her work. "Should I be afraid?" "Most aliens are," Yandra continued. "They say unlike twins are too powerful, too dangerous, too unstable." They finished together, their lights dimming sadly. Sarah turned her chair to face them fully. Well, I'm not most aliens. I'm human. And humans are curious before they're afraid. She smiled. Actually, I find your quantum bond fascinating. The twins' lights brightened with interest. You understand quantum science? Andrew asked. I was a quantum physicist before I became an ambassador, Sarah explained. And I've been studying your unique condition. She waved at the equations floating around them. Your bond isn't just biological. It's a sustained quantum entanglement. That's incredible. The council says it's just magic, Yandra said quietly. They don't want anyone studying it too closely. Sarah frowned. That confirmed her suspicions. Nothing is just magic. There's always a scientific explanation, even if we don't understand it yet. She stood up and walked to a small device on her desk. Watch this. She activated the device, creating two small balls of light. In quantum physics, we have something called entangled particles. When one changes, she touched one light, making it spin. Instantly, the other light spun in the opposite direction. The other responds. The princess is washed with growing excitement. That's like us, they said together. Exactly. Sarah grinned. When one of you feels something, she gently poked Xandra's shoulder. I feel it too, Andra laughed, touching the same spot on her own shoulder. But it's more than just shared feelings, isn't it? Sarah asked carefully. Your bond powers the Empire's quantum crystalline technology somehow. The twins grew serious. We're not supposed to talk about that, Andra whispered. Father said it was dangerous, Yandra added. Sarah knelt between them. Your father also chose me as your guardian. I think he wanted someone who could understand your bond scientifically, not just accept it as magic. Will you trust me? The twins looked at each other, their lights swirling in matching patterns as they seemed to have a silent conversation. Finally, they nodded. When we focus together, Xandra began. We can control quantum states, Yandra continued. Like this, they finished. They joined hands, and suddenly the air between them began to crystallize, forming complex patterns that shouldn't have been possible according to normal physics. Sarah watched in amazement as her quantum sensors went crazy. The twins weren't just sharing consciousness. They were actively manipulating quantum probability at a massive scale. No wonder the council treated them like a secret weapon. A loud crash from the hallway made them all jump. The crystal formation disappeared as the twins separated. Just a guard dropping something, Sarah assured them, but she noticed how quickly they'd hidden their ability. They were scared, and with good reason. The power to control quantum states like that would be incredibly valuable and dangerous in the wrong hands. Sarah made a decision. How would you like to learn more about quantum physics? She asked. Not as magic, but as science. Understanding your power might be the best way to protect it. The twins' faces lit up, literally, with excitement. Really? You teach us. The council never lets anyone teach us about our powers. Well, Sarah smiled. I'm not the council. I'm human. And humans believe knowledge is power. She pulled up more quantum equations. Let's start with the basics of quantum entanglement. As she began teaching, Sarah felt more certain than ever that the late monarch had chosen her for a reason. The council might laugh at a human guardian, but they'd underestimated both humanity's scientific understanding and their dedication to protecting those in their care. And Sarah Chen intended to prove them wrong on both counts. Sarah Chen sat in the palace library late at night, surrounded by glowing crystals that served as the Empire's version of books. Her eyes were tired from reading, but she couldn't stop. Not after what she discovered. Another unlike twin accident, she muttered, pulling up another record. 3 years ago, then 2 years ago, and 6 months ago. She rubbed her temples. That's no coincidence. A soft chime made her look up. The library door slid open, revealing Captain Kex of the Palace Guard, his crystalline form glowing with a stern blue light. Ambassador Chen, he said formally. It's unusual to see you here so late. Sarah closed the records quickly, but not before noticing how Kex's light flickered when he saw what she was reading. Just trying to learn more about unlike twin history, she said casually. For the princess's education. The princess's education is carefully planned by the council, Kex said stiffly. They don't need additional materials. I'm their guardian now, Sarah reminded him. Their education is my responsibility. Before Kex could respond, a scream echoed through the palace halls. Sarah was running before the sound faded, her heart pounding. She knew that scream. It was the twins. She burst into their bedroom, finding both princesses huddled in a corner. Their lights were dim with fear, and Sarah could see why. Their evening meal lay scattered across the floor, and their pet crystal cat was lying very still nearby. Don't touch anything, Sarah ordered as Kex and other guards arrived. She pulled out a small device from her pocket, a gift from Earth's Science Division, and scanned the food and the cat. Poison, she said grimly, reading the results. Targeted to crystalline life forms. She looked at the twins. Why didn't you eat? We felt something wrong, Xandra whispered. Like a shadow in our quantum bond, Yandra added. But Kita ate before we could stop her, they finished together, looking at their pet. Sarah's mind raced. The poison had been meant for the twins, but their quantum bond had somehow warned them. Just like their father's bond with them might have warned him before. Captain Kex, she said sharply. Who had access to their food? Only trusted kitchen staff, Kex replied. All vetted by the council themselves. The council, Sarah repeated softly. She looked at the guards, wondering which of them she could trust. The princesses will stay in my quarters tonight, and from now on, I'll be personally checking all their food. That won't be necessary, Kex began. 6 unlike twin pairs, Sarah cut him off. All dead in accidents over the past decade. And now this. She stepped closer to him, her voice low. Tell your council that this human guardian isn't as ignorant as they hoped. Kex's light pulsed with surprise, then anger, but he said nothing as Sarah led the twins away. In her quarters, Sarah helped the princesses settle into the spare bedroom. I'm sorry about Kita, she said softly. You knew something was wrong, Xandra said. You were checking the old records, Yandra continued. Why didn't you tell us? They asked together. Sarah sat between them. I needed to be sure, and now I am. She took their hands. Your father's death wasn't an accident, was it? He warned you something was coming. The twins' lights dimmed to almost nothing. He said the council was changing. Andra whispered. That unlike twins were disappearing, Yandra added. He said we could trust you because you were different. They finished. Sarah nodded grimly. He was right. Humans are different. We don't give up. We don't back down. And we protect our own. She squeezed their hands. And you're mine to protect now. As the twins finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah began planning. The council thought humans were primitive and simple. They'd learned that sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The emergency alarms woke Sarah Chen at midnight. Red lights flashed through her quarters as she rushed to check on the twins, only to find their beds empty. Xandra, Yandra, she called out, her heart racing. Then she noticed the small quantum crystal on their pillow, glowing with a message only she would understand. They were in their secret practice room. Sarah hurried through the hidden passage they'd discovered last week, her hand gripping the small stun weapon she'd started carrying. The passage led to an old storage room where she'd been teaching the twins human dance and art. She found them huddled behind a crystal column, their lights dimmed to almost nothing. Someone's coming, Xandra whispered. Many someones, Yandra added. Through the main door, they finished together. Sarah barely had time to hide before the storage room's main door slid open. 6 members of the ancient houses entered, led by High Counselor Verax herself. The humans' influence must be stopped, Verax was saying. The twins are developing abilities we never predicted. If they discover the truth about their power, then do what we did to their father, one of the others said harshly, and to all the other unlike twins who grew too powerful. Sarah felt the twins tremble beside her. She squeezed their hands gently, signaling them to stay quiet. The human complicates things, another ancient house member growled. She's been teaching them to experiment, to create new quantum patterns. At this rate, they might discover how to share their power with others. That's exactly what we've prevented for 2 centuries, Virax said. Unlike twins, were never meant to be rare. But if everyone could access quantum powers, she shook her head, the ancient houses would lose control. Sarah's mind raced. The twins' father must have discovered this truth before they killed him. That's why he'd chosen a human guardian, someone outside their system, someone who would teach the twins differently. Tomorrow night, Virax announced, we'll deal with the human first. Make it look like an accident, just like the others. Then the twins will have a tragic training accident, just like their father. Sarah felt fury build inside her, but before she could move, she noticed something amazing. The twins were holding hands, their lights pulsing in a pattern she'd never seen before. They were using the jazz rhythms she taught them, but instead of making music, they were manipulating quantum space itself. Suddenly, the storage room's gravity reversed. The ancient house members floated helplessly to the ceiling, shouting in surprise and anger. Now, Sarah yelled, pulling out her datapad. She'd been recording everything, and with one press, she broadcast the entire conversation to every communication crystal in the palace. Palace guards burst in, but not the ones controlled by the council. These were the younger guards, the ones Sarah had quietly befriended over the past weeks. They quickly secured the floating ancient house members. Ambassador Chen, Virax shouted, still stuck to the ceiling. Release us immediately. Sarah smiled coldly. I don't think so. The whole palace just heard your confession. And look around. Notice anything different about your quantum crystals. The ancient house members looked down in horror. Their personal crystals, symbols of their power, were dark and lifeless. We learned something from human jazz, Andra said proudly. How to disrupt quantum patterns with new rhythms, Yandra added. You can't hurt anyone with those crystals anymore, they finished together. Sarah put her arms around the twins. The ancient houses thought humans were too primitive to understand quantum science. They thought our creative, messy ways would weaken the twins. She looked up at the floating conspirators. Instead, we showed them how to make their power stronger than ever. As more guards arrived, and the news spread through the palace, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The twins were safe, but there was still a lot of work to do. It was time to show the galaxy what humans, and unlike twins, could achieve together. Sometimes, she thought, the best revolutions start with a simple music lesson. Sarah Chen stood in the Grand Crystal Hall, surrounded by chaos. The news of the ancient house's conspiracy had spread like wildfire, and now the palace was hosting an emergency gathering of all noble families. Order. We demand order, shouted the temporary council leader, but nobody was listening. Hundreds of crystalline beings filled the hall, their lights flashing with anger and confusion. The twins stood beside Sarah, their forms glowing steadily despite the tension. 3 days had passed since the storage room incident, but not everyone was happy about the ancient house's arrest. The human has no right, shouted one noble. She's corrupted the royal twins with primitive ideas. She's destroyed centuries of tradition, yelled another. Sarah stayed calm, remembering her human combat training. She'd noticed several suspicious figures moving through the crowd, their lights dimmed unnaturally. The assassins would strike soon. She wasn't wrong. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Masked figures launched themselves toward the twins, wielding dark crystal weapons designed to disrupt quantum bonds. But Sarah was ready. Now, she shouted, pulling 2 small devices from her pocket. She threw them into the air, where they burst into clouds of reflective dust. a simple human trick that confused crystalline beings' light-based vision. The twins immediately began their jazz-inspired quantum manipulation, creating a protective barrier around themselves. Sarah had taught them this move using human dance steps as a guide. An assassin reached Sarah, swinging the crystal blade. The crowd gasped, expecting the primitive human to fall easily. Instead, Sarah smiled. Years of human martial arts training took over. She ducked under the swing, grabbed the assassin's arm, and used their own momentum to throw them into another attacker. The crystalline beings crashed together with a musical chime. The human fights without weapons, someone shouted in disbelief. Watch and learn, Sarah muttered, pulling off her jacket. A third assassin charged, and Sarah met them with a series of quick strikes aimed at the weak points in crystalline anatomy. Points she'd carefully studied during her time as guardian. The twins, meanwhile, were putting their human training to good use. They moved in perfect sync, their quantum powers flowing like a jazz duet. When one assassin tried to disrupt their bond, they simply shifted the pattern like improvisational dancers. Impossible, the assassin cried. Unlike twins can't adapt their patterns this quickly. They can when they think creatively, Sarah called out, finishing her own fight with a well-placed elbow strike. The remaining assassins found themselves trapped in a quantum field that the twins had modeled after a human kaleidoscope. The hall fell silent as the palace guards secured the assassins. Sarah straightened her clothes and addressed the shocked crowd. You all thought humans were primitive because we don't have quantum powers, she said clearly. But we've survived and thrived because we learn, we adapt, and we think differently. She gestured to the twins. Your ancient houses tried to control unlike twins by limiting how they could use their powers. We humans showed them new possibilities instead. Xandra stepped forward. She taught us to dance. To make music, Yandra added. To see our powers as art, not just tools. They finished together. The crowd watched in amazement as the twins demonstrated, their quantum patterns flowing like a beautiful light show. It was nothing like the rigid traditional uses of quantum power they were used to seeing. Your empire has been holding itself back, Sarah continued. Imagine what you could achieve if you combined your quantum science with human creativity. She could see the idea taking hold. Already, some of the younger nobles were trying to move their lights in rhythm with the twins' display. Sarah smiled. The assassination attempt had backfired completely. Instead of showing human weakness, it had demonstrated human strength. And now, finally, the Empire was beginning to understand that different didn't mean primitive. Sometimes, the best way to win a fight was to turn it into a dance. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the floor of the palace laboratory, surrounded by excited young crystalline scientists. 2 weeks had passed since the assassination attempt, and things were changing rapidly in the Empire. Show us again, one young scientist begged. How do the twins create new quantum patterns? Sarah looked at Xandra and Yandra, who were demonstrating their latest discovery. The twins sat facing each other, their lights pulsing to a gentle human meditation, rhythms Sarah had taught them. The key isn't forcing the quantum bond, Sarah explained. It's about letting it flow naturally, like music. The twins raised their hands, and the air between them filled with shifting quantum crystals. But this time, something different happened. The crystals expanded outward, touching the watching scientists. To everyone's amazement, the scientists' own lights began to pulse in harmony with the twins. I can feel it, one scientist gasped. The quantum connection. Me too, another added. It's like jazz, a third finished, making Sarah smile. Suddenly, the laboratory door burst open. A group of older council members rushed in, their lights flashing with alarm. Stop this immediately, their leader demanded. Unlike twin powers cannot be shared. It's impossible. Impossible. Sarah stood up calmly, or just forbidden. She gestured to the young scientists, who were now creating their own small quantum crystals. Look around. The twins aren't special because they were born royal. They're special because they were born connected, and that connection can be taught. Using human methods. The council member scoffed. Exactly, Sarah nodded. Your rigid traditions tried to control quantum powers. We humans understand that some things work better when you let them flow freely. She walked to a large display screen and pulled up her research data. Look at these scans. When the twins use meditation and music to guide their powers, their quantum patterns become clearer, not weaker. And those patterns can resonate with others. The twins stepped forward. We can teach anyone to form quantum bonds, Andra said confidently, just like Father suspected was possible. Yandra added. That's why the ancient houses wanted to stop us. They finished together. The council members looked at each other nervously. One of them spoke up, but if everyone can access quantum powers, then your society becomes stronger, not weaker. Sarah interrupted. On Earth, we have a saying. A rising tide lifts all boats. When you share knowledge and power, everyone benefits. The young scientists were now working in pairs, trying to create quantum bonds using the twins' techniques. Some were already succeeding, their lights synchronizing as they hummed human melodies. This is revolution. The council leader sputtered. No, Sarah corrected gently. This is evolution. Your empire has been stuck because you tried to control something that needs to be free to grow. She looked at the twins proudly. These children showed us that quantum science isn't about rigid rules. It's about connection, creativity, and trust. More palace staff were gathering at the laboratory doors, watching in wonder as the young scientists demonstrated their new abilities. Sarah could see hope in their lights, perhaps for the first time in generations. The ancient houses were wrong about humans, one of the younger council members said suddenly. We thought you were primitive because you lacked quantum powers, but you understood something we have forgotten. The power of innovation. Sarah watched as the twins moved among the scientists, teaching and encouraging them, just as she had taught the twins. Everything was changing, and there would be challenges ahead, but the truth was finally free. Sometimes, she said softly, it takes an outsider's eyes to see the real potential in things. She touched the quantum crystal necklace the twins had made for her, and sometimes the most primitive solution is exactly what an advanced civilization needs. The revolution in understanding had begun, and it started with a human teaching two crystalline children how to dance.